We're going to be working on half of our hip circumference. So you take your hip circumference, divide by 2. Then you also take your skirt length from the waist wherever you want it to stop. Then we have our hip length from the waist to your hip, the widest part of your hip. We go ahead to take our nipple point to nipple point measurements, divide by 2. Mine divided by 2 is going to give me 4. Now do not start your measurement from that middle point, the center line. No, measurement shouldn't start from that center line. Take notes. You're going to take your measurement from the side of paper. Now the right hand side is the back part of my skirt, while the left hand side is the front side of my skirt. So I'll take my 4 inches point and mark it there. Then I go ahead to do the same thing for the front part of my skirt. Mark the 4 inches point. Make sure you indicate your front and your back to avoid confusion. A front dart for your skirt is usually longer than the back dart. So the front dart, we are going to make use of 6 inches for the dart length. You mark out the points for the dart length. Ensure you also measure out the 4 inches from the side to ensure that your line is straight and in place. Then you connect your dotted lines with a meter rule. To get our dart legs, we're going to measure 0.5 inch at the left and 0.5 inch at the right hand side of that dart line that we marked out. Then you go ahead to connect it to the end point of the dart length. So here we have our dart legs. Recall I said the front dart is usually longer than the back dart. So our back dart length is going to be 1 inch shorter than the front dart length. In that case, we're going to have 5 inches for the back dart length and 6 inches for the front dart length. Ensure you take the 4 inches down to the end of the dart length to ensure that your 4 inches is in place, to ensure that your lines are in place and equal. 6 inches for the front and 5 inches for the back. Go ahead to roll the straight line and then connect your dart length. Now the waist circumference I'm working with is 30 inches. Divide by 4, I have 7.5. So your measurement will be divided by 4. You mark out as 7.5 plus 1 inch for your dart. We are not going to be adding allowances to this pattern because it's a pattern. After cutting it out, you can add whatever allowance you want, just in case you want to create another style, like recreate something from your pattern. So I also went ahead to take my hip circumference divided by 4. Now I have it exact because remember I divided my hip circumference into 2. So that center line indicates your hip circumference divided by 4. Now you go ahead with your curve or freestyle with your hands and connect your hip to the waist, the circumference you took divided by 4. Now for the lower part of your skirt, if you want it really fitted, you subtract 2 inches from your hip circumference. 2 inches from your hip circumference. If you do not want it fitted, then you can subtract 1 inch from your hip circumference, divide by 4. Now my hip circumference, I have it to be 9.25 minus 2 inches will give me 7.25. So you are going to mark out that 7.25 on the full length of your fabric. Remember, measurement begins from the side and not from the center. Whatever you do to the front, you do to the back. Once you're done marking out the points, you connect to your hip. And that's that for your main skirt part. Now we are going to be adding a zip allowance to the back part of the skirt. You can include your zip allowance without sewing allowance, so that you can include sewing allowance on your fabric. So your allowance depend on whatever you use for your allowance, depend on whatever, it's your choice, let me put it that way, and then you go ahead to cut.